Welcome to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset, the leading data and analytics company for the cannabis industry.
So, Emily, we're just coming off of a holiday weekend, and I have a pretty good idea of something you did not do this weekend, and that would be going to see the new Marvel Ant-Man movie. Is that a good guess?
That would be correct. And don't even get me started on Marvel.
I know a little bit about your love of Marvel movies, but I also noticed that you didn't tweet about it. Join the almost 3 million people tweeting about Marvel, which actually is significantly less, actually 57% less or so than cannabis Twitter. And that's what I want to talk about today was all the news coming out of Twitter related to cannabis. And we've got some stats. And I think this is a very interesting story. And I know this kind of broke last week. We didn't get a chance to talk about it, but I think there's a lot that we can add to this kind of discussion here. One of them being the amount of conversations that are happening around cannabis. So some numbers that we got from Twitter. In 2022 alone, 20 million total tweets about cannabis, 4.5 million unique authors that tweeted about cannabis. And they actually have this stat that it's actually 10% more tweets and 57% more unique authors than the Marvel conversation. So the Marvel conversation, as they call it, it must be a pretty significant piece. And I would imagine Twitter is like the perfect place for the, people talking about Marvel movies and all of that. So really, I'm frankly surprised. I mean, I know there's a lot of cannabis content on Twitter, but I wouldn't think that it would be more than Marvel.
Well, I think what is most interesting when you share those data points is that you can't swing a stick without hitting a Marvel movie these days.
Or a weekend without a new opening.
Yes, exactly. I mean, when I went to see Avatar, the previews, there were 2 back-to-back Marvel previews. I was like, they can't even stop. They just can't stop. So the other thing that occurs to me is that the conversations around Marvel have to be well driven by the immense marketing machine behind Marvel. And so the fact that an industry that has been ignored and not allowed to participate in a paid advertising conversation online substantially is driving this much organic discussion through the Twitter platform, I think is really, really interesting. So I thought that this data around Twitter is really it's pointing in the direction of something. I'll say another thing about this. When Morgan and I first started investing in cannabis and we were doing our research on it in like 2012, 2013, Morgan was always following the Google trends around Googled key terms such as cannabis, hemp, marijuana. And so for us, that was actually kind of a leading indicator to where things were going because there was clearly a rising line around the interest in this area.
Yeah, and to see so much Twitter engagement, it's a perfect parallel. So this kind of came out of left field in some ways, right? I know that everybody knows the current situation of Twitter with their new owner. I saw today Elon Musk posted something along the lines of like, I spent $45 billion to buy the world's largest nonprofit. Yeah, did you see that?
I actually laughed on that one.
I know. So I think that's a tell on where his head's at as far as revenue goes. And so knowing that they have such high engagement, knowing that they're a private company, and I feel like Elon Musk is someone that's willing to take a bit more take on a bit more when it comes to the risk here. It would make sense that they saw this opportunity and they jumped on it.
I think, yeah. So I remember actually when this entered into my consciousness was several Fridays ago. I was walking my dog, and on Friday, it's hard for me to kind of make that transition off my devices to start my weekend as a founder and entrepreneur in my own right. And I remember I was throwing the ball for Sprout, and I looked at my phone, and there was an inbound inquiry from someone with a Twitter email address. And at first I thought it was like a joke. I was like, there's no way someone at Twitter is reaching out to me, but immediately sent it to the team. And I couldn't help but, as you know, and thank you for retweeting. But I mean, one of the first things when Elon took over Twitter in April, I think was when he assumed, or when he, made the bid. And then there was the whole thing that happened over the summer before he got the keys, so to speak, or brought the kitchen sink into the Twitter building here in San Francisco. But, I was like, I know how you could generate some revenue. So it was kind of full circle that all of a sudden this inquiry came in. And so started having conversations with Alexa. It was amazing in our first conversations. It was very clear that they had been paying attention to our industry and seeing who's here and who's leading these conversations and what we're all talking about. And they have a ton of data, just like you do. And so, we just all started having conversations. I know you had conversations with them. I know they've had conversations with our friends at Mattio and other groups. And it's been a really interesting deep dive very quickly. And I think this is one of the benefits of sometimes when you become a private company, you have a little more flexibility in terms of being able to really kind of lean in on initiatives where others might fear to tread.
Yeah, absolutely. And there were some headlines at the end of the year. I think it was at the end of the year where Twitter revenue, you probably saw the stuff about large advertisers kind of pulling out of the platform, given the new ownership, kind of taking a wait and see approach or whatever reason. And there was some rumors. I don't know how verified this stuff is because I think it came from some internal sources, but something about like a 40% drop in ad revenue. And they went, as they were a public company, they did 5 billion in revenue in 21. So you can use that as a kind of a benchmark. And if that is the case, 40% drop gets them down to 3 billion, which is, sizable revenues, but they got a long hill to climb here. Right. And I think that looking at the opportunity in cannabis is, I mean, it's a no brainer to try and capture some of that ad spend. Like a good proxy when I think about, if I was in their shoes, just looking at companies like Weed Maps and Leafly, which right now kind of own that cannabis consumer mind share. And there's a whole host of other kind of platforms out there, like a long tail of a lot of platforms. But just when you look at the Weed Maps revenue, when you look at Leafly revenue, and you were to combine that, it actually could be, about 10% of that $3 billion. I mean, it's like $300 million, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so that's meaningful, and not that all the revenue is going to go from Weed Maps to Leafly, but I do think that this is a new opportunity to kind of see, can this pull more people into the category? And this is something where I feel like we're always talking about, right? Is like this industry is going to grow by more access and more people coming in and purchasing cannabis. And if you're not an active consumer or like someone that's doing a lot of purposeful research, like you're actively going out and searching strains or searching for specific dispensaries, but you're just browsing Twitter because you're interested in the Marvel conversation and learning about what's going on with Ant-Man, then all of a sudden an ad gets pushed to you, right? And that's advertising. I mean, that's what you want, and they can do a lot of good targeting, right? They're very sophisticated platforms. They're just built around targeting consumers. When you look at companies like Meta, you look at companies like Twitter, and so they can find people like me that may be browsing Twitter, and push an ad, and it might be like, oh yeah, that's enough to nudge me to go to a store, where I might not be like, oh, I'm going to open the Leafly app today and start reading reviews, or I'm going to go to Weed Maps and look for new stores around me. Like that use case is just very purposeful, right? So Twitter is kind of a passive event. You have a little bit of time, you open it up, you scroll through, and an ad gets pushed to you. So I think it could be a good channel, for the industry to drive, more awareness and, more normalization of it too, right? If I'm just browsing Twitter and that gets pushed to me, just like maybe like an alcohol ad would get pushed to me. I think that's powerful for the space, right? And just making it just a normal thing, just like everything else.
I think that's absolutely right. And, one of the things when you're trying to grab people's attention or to convert people from something into sales is something called familiarity bias. And I think that it does seem to show up in Twitter's data. For example, she points out that 76% of people surveyed said a conversation on Twitter resulted in them purchasing a product. And I get my guess is, and the way I know how these things work just from my background and also from just understanding psychology, is like what it is at the end that ends up being the thing to push you over the edge. Maybe you take note of that, but you may not have stitched together all the touch points that existed along the way to get this lodged into your brain to make you have an affinity for it. And I think that, to your point, when you're going to Wheat Maps, when you're going to Leafly, those are very purpose driven paths. So it's a lot, you're already self-selecting into a smaller universe. This is a much broader universe, but it does have the technology to make sure that it exists in the location that's relevant to your business, to the age range that's relevant to your business. Like, we know that they've done the same thing in other industries that are heavily regulated, like wine or in gambling. And so you have to have those same regulatory requirements around those industries, and then have ads that work within those regulatory frameworks. So, and also have technology that won't accidentally start pushing this ad to like a 13-year-old or whatever it might be. So it's an interesting thing where you're entering into an inherent conversation on a platform that is a community based and conversational based platform, and then you're able to serve up ad content to the people that are drawn toward that. And I think that that's where you start to see real magic in advertising and real value in the allocation of advertising. And I think platforms like Leafly and Weed Maps have tried to fill in the gaps for this, but I think that it is welcomed to see this open up into a broader ecosystem.
Yeah, and on the engagement numbers, so 4.5 million unique authors tweeted about cannabis in the U.S., and then when you layer in Canada, is another 333,000. And so those numbers are getting pretty large, and the age groups that they talk about, the breakdown of cannabis tweeters is sub 34 is about 75%, which is huge. And that's like the coveted demographic, right? That all advertisers want to reach, is that, sub 34. And we know that Gen Z, like the 21 plus, like is growing like crazy as far as sales goes. So like that's where the consumers are. And then you have like the overlap of other interests, right? And there's this whole slide in their deck around, um, you know, co-mentioned topics in cannabis tweets. So politics, as maybe not unsurprising, is in a lot of it, right? Business and finance, food, sports, music, drinks, everything you would kind of think of. So there's that kind of crossover, with some more mainstream categories as well. So, you can kind of work back from there too, right? You can go after business and finance, someone who's in that world, or interested in those types of topics, and target them with cannabis because of the sizable overlap that they see here. So I think that's where, the opportunity comes through on new people in the category, or just getting them to stores that they might not, because they're not like doing that purpose driven, like I'm opening Leafly because I'm trying to find something specific, but instead I'm just browsing because I'm reading about sports, and then this gets pushed to me. I think that's a huge advantage. And really what a lot of I would love to see more ads pushed into my feed around that. I would love to see how that could be leveraged by operators with like really good targeting, geo targeting. When you think about it, if you're a retailer, your dispensary, you're a brand out there, like how do you market, right? Like really, how do you reach like a broad audience? You don't have a lot of options, as far as like traditional formats. There's the billboards that we see everywhere. Those aren't particularly targeted, right? Unless you're trying to target someone on the 101 or something. There's no like, really going after that specific person. And these platforms like Twitter, enable that. And I don't know, it's going to be kind of crazy, because this is like one of those things that, I don't know. We always talk a lot about for like cannabis specific ancillary companies of, you know, where's your place in the world today versus where's your place in the world tomorrow, post legalization. And this is pre legalization, and you're seeing these changes happen. But like, how do you maintain relevance at the scale, that you might have? And I think like the weed maps and the leaflies will always have relevance in the context of like the core consumer, right? That the one who's like defined by cannabis, or like actively, researching constantly. But the general consumer, they're on platforms like Twitter, right? So it just seems like it will be interesting to see this impact. What it may have on ad spend on platforms like Weed Maps that target consumers.
Well, and I think what you were just talking to about how it crosses over into these other areas is that and we've had folks on the show, talking about this, like Rick Farman from Outside Lands with music festivals, and people do use Twitter at music festivals to kind of navigate what's happening in the moment at the festival using hashtags and different things. And I could see more engagement around these things. And what it does also do is create more cross branding opportunities from a cannabis brand to like a festival or a cannabis brand to another music brand. I mean, this is not outside of the realm of possibility and something that makes a lot of sense. And when you can, as a brand, see the crossover of what people are talking about, like if music is one of the top categories, and it is that people talk about cannabis and music, like duh. I mean, this is obvious, but it's true. And the fact that people are engaging in discourse in this way, it does create opportunities. Like I can't help but think of that GTI brand Rhythm, and it's like find your rhythm and all about, there's some things about music. There's also Garcia Selects, obvious tie-ins there for things when they're going on in shows when they're going on. But I think it gets broader than that to think about other lifestyle brands where this can kind of intersect. And, one of the things that came up, we did a spaces about it to try to help to illuminate people on some of the updated policy that was put forth by Twitter after they first announced this. Or, well, they didn't announce it. Add something announced it. But the the thing I thought that was really interesting is that actually this democratizes access to advertising for operators. So the way that this is set up is it's actually totally achievable for smaller businesses to leverage this platform. And it's, from what I can understand, more cost effective, and it can work for single location retailers like our friend Suzanne Nicholson in New Jersey. She can reach out to local people who are in the age range and demographic that she's hoping to reach in that for her single retail location in New Jersey. And I think that's really important because some of the other platforms can be expensive, and given the reach and maybe the data that you're getting back, it's a bit more difficult. So it's nice to have these options for these different sizes of business.
Totally. I saw some MSOs jump on it pretty quickly, issuing some press releases saying that they're running campaigns on Twitter, probably, looking for a headline there, but it is good to see adoption, right? Especially this time where the industry seems to have a bit of a cash crunch and it's hard to spend the marketing dollars. Hopefully this is something that's cost effective and can show some good returns and bring people in and, translate that into dollars into the industry that they can turn around and spend on more advertising. So, good to see. I haven't had any pushed to me. Have you had any pushed to you yet, Emily?
No, no, I
No.
haven't. That's a good point, but I'm trying to think of what does get pushed to me. I'm a pretty cantankerous advertising consumer. Like I will give feedback on ads. Like if like for some reason Burger King was getting pushed to me several months ago, and I was like, that just doesn't check out. If anybody ever saw my diet, they would know that's a waste of money for Burger King. But maybe yeah, so I don't know. So you haven't seen it. I did know,
I
for
haven't
example,
either. Yeah.
PAX. Yeah. So PAX, I connected PAX with Twitter. PAX, is a pretty world. Actually, the data around brand recognition for PAX, because it's been device only and can sell across the
Oh, right,
globe,
right. The
is
PAX 2 and devices like that, not the Era,
yeah,
right? But that's
no,
right. Yeah, sold
yeah,
everywhere.
sold everywhere, and was sold originally for like as a tobacco accessory for all
That's
your
right.
loose tobacco needs. But I think that actually the new packs really slaps. The one that you can put the little pucks in, that's a sidebar. I've been enjoying that as my device of choice lately. But they were one of the groups to jump right on this, and they do have a pretty refined marketing and advertising kind of thought process over at that company. And so they were very quick to kind of get right on top of this. So that's another group that's doing it. I did get outreach from some other folks on Twitter who are already planning to, or are in talks to get it done. So it seems like people are grabbing it pretty quickly. I'll be curious to see if who pops into my feed.
Yeah, exactly. The first time I see it, I'm going to be pretty excited. So I keep looking for it. I feel like I'm a good target, but maybe not. Maybe I'm like you in some bucket that's like prohibit advertisers not clicking enough ads or something. But it's great to see that some are coming in. Do you think this is going to turn into any others? Like my suspicion is it's kind of a unique anomaly, but I do think it's the one more domino falling, right? And I think that's good. Um, but do you see other platforms, that have uh, kind of in the similar social network kind of vein doing something like this, or Google or others? Most of them are public, or they're all public. Um, I don't, TikTok would be a weird one, just because that seems to skew pretty young these days. But do you think it's going to go anywhere? Do you think this is kind of a one-off? And Twitter's going to be the only place.
Well, I'm going to pose that back to you after I give my thoughts. But I mean, over the weekend, it came out that Zuckerberg's going to get people to pay for the verified
Oh, right.
check mark on Meta. So I don't know.
Times are
I
tough.
think people are looking, yeah, they're looking in the couch for change. So maybe cannabis revenue is not such a bad source after all. But yeah, I think it'd be interesting. I do think, if Instagram would just start by letting people have accounts there without constantly getting kicked off. I mean, you got to follow the rules, but Instagram would be a great platform for this. I am not a participant in TikTok because I don't believe in inviting foreign governments into my home. But I think that maybe TikTok would be good. I'm sure it'd be great because it seems like it's really good at brainwashing people to make interesting choices. Sai, I'm curious about what your thoughts are on this because I thought you made a really great point after reading the attestation around this. As a framework. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. So I don't know if anybody else do. I think you're right about Instagram. I mean, Instagram, if they would just allow people to have accounts, that's great already. But I feel like if they were to do it, they would absolutely crush it, right? I think it would
Crush.
take up so much of the ad revenue. And it's a funny point about I saw that Meta is doing the verified. You see, it's like $12 a month, and you get like not much, like a live chat, I think is one of them. A couple other things, but it doesn't seem like some protection of your account if someone's trying to impersonate you, which it's like that's got to be a small audience of people are willing to pay 120 plus a year because people may be impersonating you. Live chat,
Shouldn't
yeah.
that just be like part of the platform to not have your identity ripped off?
Yeah, you'd
Like
think
that
so.
feels like a table stakes. Yeah.
But
Okay.
I'm not a Facebook user anymore for some years, so I don't know. I'm not like the perfect one, but I thought it was funny. They are searching the couch for change these days. I wonder if they're going to keep the VR thing, at this point, because they're pouring tons into that. But anyways, the attestation form you're asking me about. I think, yeah. So when I saw this to advertise on Twitter, you need to sign this marijuana product advertiser attestation form, which basically tells you or tells them that you're legally able to advertise. Like, you're in compliance with, local state laws. You're not going to advertise in such a way as to violate any sort of law, and so on, right? So it's this like list, and you sign it. You definitely have to put your name like on each one of these lines here. And so I was thinking to myself, like, why can't everyone do this, right? Because it's basically saying like you're operating within the framework and the market that you're in, and you're
Mhm.
stating as such. And so it's taking away some of the onus from Twitter to say, well, they said that they were a legal operator. It's not us supporting people that don't have a license, and so on. And it seems like an easy way to
Mhm.
scale it where they don't have to go out and like pull licenses and cross reference, in the California cannabis database, and see if this is a legal operator or what have you. The advertiser does that, right? So it's like
Mhm.
I'm no lawyer, but it seems like if they're doing it, it's probably a good enough shield for Twitter to not get in trouble. Should there be a bad actor who signs this and then turns out doesn't have a license or something? Um, and so, why couldn't these other operators do it or anybody do it? It seems like even like service companies, we're always dealing with service companies, like, whether it's bill payment or whatever, you name it, like every little thing that we deal with, that we subscribe to as a organization. They ask you, well, what type of business are you in, right? And not just payments. Like payments are the obvious one, banking's the obvious one, right? Like we cannot take like Stripe, to take like credit cards, right? Because they just have a policy where they won't let companies that are involved in the space, even though we're a technology information data company. um, but it seems like they could just give us one of these attestation forms and then say, okay, if you're operating legally and you're allowed to do this, then we can support you legally. And maybe not payments, maybe not banking, but all the other services, the small services. So I don't know. It's an interesting angle, but again, I'm not a lawyer, but I feel like Twitter's doing it. They must have some good lawyers on staff there, to be able to navigate this, and I'm sure it was heavily scrutinized. So I think there's plenty of reason why others could do it, and maybe we're in a world where people are searching the couch for change, and they can look to this as a model and say, well, Twitter did it. What's stopping us from doing it?
I think that you just hit that right on the head. And I think that, I do know that they spent a lot of time with legal counsel going through ways that they could actually allow the industry to do this. So I feel like they've definitely vetted it. I also think that there's a point where, what is it? Don't let perfection get in the way of good, or something to
Right.
that effect. And, as a private company that with, their substantial shareholder own running the company, I think they had the ability to be a little more nimble, but to create a pathway, and I do think, like, for example, as I've shared with you, I've seen the legal documents that have been put together by really intelligent lawyers about why the exchanges could accept operating cannabis companies. There are paths to doing this. And I think that we've had 12 years of excess of a bull market, and there wasn't a lot of motivation to try to understand how to work with cannabis companies to take our very good money. I feel like we're like what's her Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman. We're
Mm.
like, well, you might not get this reference, but other people will. And she's like, goes into the store in Beverly Hills, and they're like, we don't think we have something for you here. And then she comes back and salts them. Do you work on commission? But I think that you know e- every every lady who listens to this, and probably enough guys, will get that joke. But I think they figured out how to do it, and they took the steps to do it, and maybe they do create a path. And as you and I have talked about numerous times on the show, private industry can be the way to see change, moves faster than government. And so maybe they will create these frameworks and have it happen. It was interesting too, because I was thinking about how Elon with Tesla. And one of the things I had learned early on was that he really wanted those cars not to have rear view mirrors, but it had been written into legislation to require rear view mirrors on all cars, right, as a safety feature. Now there's all of these 360 cameras. You do not need mirrors, but they exist because of this regulatory requirement. I saw on the Cybertruck, he said, I think they come with it, but with the option to remove them, because I think they're anticipating change at some point. I saw him specifically note that
That's cool.
somewhere. And I was, yeah. So, I mean, it's a small thing, but it actually matters when you're thinking about mileage and all of these different drag on from a aeronautical design, or whatever you call it, engineering. But I think all of that adds up. And so someone like him, he does clearly push boundaries and try to think around corners, to his credit. And I think, this is just an example of that.
Yeah. Well, it's exciting. I think, 5 million people tweeting about cannabis is a big deal, especially when you're comparing it to Ant-Man or the Marvel conversation. And with the reviews I've been reading about Ant-Man, I have a feeling that cannabis is going to continue to outpace Marvel at this point.
There's not enough cannabis in the world to get through Ant-Man, apparently.
Thanks for listening to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset. For more information on Headset, visit headset.io.